and welcome to this special pre-budget live broadcast from International Business Times in collaboration with Deloitte. Everybody is raving about the great Indian budget, as we call it. Some call it the election budget and some are calling it the populist budget filled with sops. What it's exactly going to be and what the Finance Minister Jaitley is going to do ultimately on the D-Day remains to be seen. But what we know today is what we're trying to understand in this pre-budget live broadcast for you from International Business Times is what to expect from the upcoming budget. Today on this special live broadcast, I have with me Mr. Kalpesh Maroo, the partner at Deloitte India for Direct Tax. Welcome Kalpesh to the show. See, everybody is talking about what this particular budget is going to have in store for everybody, be it a common man or be it the companies. From the direct tax point of view, what do you think is in the offing?
Difficult to guess. I can talk about what the expectations are going to be. I think just to set a bit of a backdrop, this budget comes in the backdrop of some fairly significant changes in the US tax system. So the world of tax, as we've sort of known and understood over the last several years, has undergone a lot of changes. Countries have come together in what is perhaps an unprecedented project in the form of BEPS. A lot of the action items from there are getting implemented into the domestic laws of countries, and then you have countries like the US which have gone the other way around in terms of unleashing stupendous tax reforms. So the hope and the expectation from industry will be how does India react to this? We already have a finance minister here who's made a promise of bringing down corporate tax rates progressively to 25%. So the hope is, if this is the last full budget that the government presents, will the big bang populist reforms and measures and tax cuts, will they be preponed to this year or are they going to go pushed into the next year? I think to my mind, that will be the single largest factor that the industry will look at. Do the headline corporate tax rates come down to 25?
Right. Now, talking about overall expectation from the industry, we have seen that India was to earlier being seen as a country which is not very open and not very supportive of its business regimes. What do you think? Where do you think India is going if you compare with the previous budget and the expectations of the current budget?
So I think it's no secret that the Prime Minister personally has been monitoring the index of doing business in India, ease of doing business. Right. And that's high on the agenda. The question, however, is ease of doing business from a regulatory approval standpoint is one aspect. The second aspect is what does that translate into a tax rate? Right. Expectation clearly, like I said, from the industry is that the tax rates will come down and they'll come down fast. But the question is, does the government have the fiscal room in order to be able to do this in the current year? And 2-3 factors come in mind. Right. One, I think we are just settling into the post-GST era. While the December numbers of collections have shown a very positive sign, we just don't know on a full year basis where we will sort of end up. That's one part. The second part is, I think the cushion that the government experienced in the first 2-3 years of its existence in the form of oil prices, they seem to be hardening up. So in other words, the amount of mop-up that happened on excise duty, etc., is going to probably come down if the prices continue to remain as hard as they are. And that also puts a pressure on the subsidies.
Right.
So the question really is, where is the fiscal room to be able to bring down taxes, not just for corporates, also for individuals, because that's less spoken about, but that's an equally legitimate demand if you look at it. And therefore it's going to be a tight balance. The question is going to be whether the finance minister is going to basically give the fiscal consolidation targets a go by for a year and go for an all-out populist budget. And if that is broadly the direction, is there
enough headroom? Do you see that there is enough headroom for that?
Doesn't look like it. At this stage, doesn't look like it. But we'll have to see what happens.
So we have a user who has written a question about that there's a need to address the tax issues with respect to the IBC cases. What are your thoughts on that?
So, firstly, to begin with, I think if you look at the whole woes of the banking sector, the fact that we've had a negative credit growth, that the bank's balance sheets are not in a great shape, IBC is a welcome move. it's taken off at a far faster clip than what one would have expected. And clearly that, along with the bank recapitalization, is one of the two things that the government is doing to fix this sector.
Right.
Because unless one fixes this, there's very little hope that credit supply will pick up, for the reason that banks are in the whole balance sheet contraction stage. Now, as far as the tax issues on IBCs are concerned, there are a fair few of them that need to be sort of dealt with. There is the issue of minimum alternate tax. Essentially, conceptually, what happens is if a large part of IBC and any settlement and a takeover is going to involve banks having to write off some loans, and those write-off of loans are going to create accounting income in the books of the companies,
Right.
and whether there is MAT on it. The fact that IBC is important is demonstrated by the fact that the government didn't even wait for the budget. They in fact announced a relief before the budget to say, in the greater interest, we are basically not going to levy MAT on book profits as a result of the loan restructuring. Absolutely welcome. But there are several other aspects similar to those. The other aspect is, if there is a write back of a loan while there is no MAT, does it create a taxable income? Can a company, can a survivor, a white knight, come in and take over a company at its true fair value, but that fair value may be less compared to the book value based fair valuation that the income tax department prescribes? Does that create a tax liability? So there are a plethora of issues. I have hoped that the pace at which the government has looked at IBC and the fact that it is the only solution, my hope is that this budget will address a bunch of them in a holistic manner.
Right. Now, talking about the expected tax ops for the SEZs, what do you think, keeping Make in India in mind, that push that is required, what do you think about that?
So, expected SOPs, very questionable.
Yeah.
The industry is expecting them, but I think the government has provided a fairly clear roadmap in terms of how the SEZ SOPs are going to be phased out. While I think it's good for the industry, just the fiscal room that is available to the government and the long-term trend of not extending profit-based holidays, I'm less hopeful that they will come through this year.
Right. And there's one more question I'll take. What measures do you think that the finance minister will be expected to take to address the tax uncertainty which is affecting the foreign investment flows?
So this is a favorite each year, right? And again, this is something that's been on the radar for a while now. Unfortunately, we got to understand that there is very little that a budget or the provisions of the law can do vis-a-vis tax administration. It just needs to be sustained systemic efforts and administrative reforms. And while I think you will have statement of intents come out, there is, in terms of absolute proposals that you're likely to see, very little I expect to be coming out of this budget, specifically dealing with this. The one issue that comes to mind as an immediate thing that can be addressed is there a way that, for example, the advanced ruling mechanism can be strengthened? Can we have rulings come out faster?
Right.
The government has spoken about more benches which have been implemented recently, but is there a way in which this can be implemented with greater rigor?
Right.
But like I said, this is more a 3 to 5 year agenda as against a single year agenda
Right.
for the budget.
Another question from a user coming in, that will there be more clarity and more favorable conditions on aspects like retrospective taxation?
I think, again, to be fair to the government, there have been very few retrospective amendments that have happened in the past few years. So yes, we had a wave of retrospective amendments that came in really post the Supreme Court judgment in the case of Vodafone, which is a very high profile case. But other than that, not many retrospective amendments that have happened, and therefore the fact that there have been no amendments of this nature itself is good news, and hope that that continues.
Right. So just for the people who have just joined in this live broadcast, we are currently doing a special live broadcast from International Business Times on the pre-budget expectations of the great Indian budget coming up. Now moving on to the bank's NPA, that's again something that everybody has been talking about. What are your thoughts on that?
Big problem. I think clearly the single largest factor that's impacting private investments today. I mean, if you looked at the growth and growth pattern in the last 3 years, a disproportionate fact that comes out is a lot of it is driven by government funding. At some point, the private investment cycle needs to kickstart, and the whole reason attributed to the lack of a private investment cycle is the fact that corporates are at a very fast pace shrinking their balance sheet, reducing their debt, and linked to that is the whole NPA problem. We spoke about IBC, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code a while back. Clearly, this seems to be the one area of focus of the government to clean up the entire NPMS. Again, is this likely to yield results in a quick manner? Unfortunately, there are no quick fix solutions. This is a problem that we have inherited or created over a period of time over successive governments and successive banks lending and following not so great lending practices. We think this is going to take a few years for it to be cleaned up, but at least we are moving in the right direction.
What about abolishing the ICDS provisions?
A lot of clamor for it. There is a recent High Court decision which pretty much clamps down on ICDS. I suspect that the government is going to make changes in the budget this year to bring in force some of the provisions of ICDS that got struck down, but we'll have to wait to see what happens.
My favorite, which is the real estate. What are your thoughts on that? What do you expect?
So real estate, unfortunately, last year the budget had a bit of a mixed bag.
Right.
Talking to developers across the country, I think if there was one feature or one change in the budget that adversely impacted the sector was this whole deduction that was available on interest on second home purchases was completely clamped down, and in an informal conversation with the CFOs of the real estate businesses across the country, that resulted in a 20 to 25% cut in the market overall.
Right.
Now that plus RERA plus GST, and in sum total you have a disaster. We have major cities across India where residential markets have been sluggish.
Inventory is huge.
Inventories are huge.
Yeah.
And if there is one change that the real estate sector, if they had one wish that they would ask from the finance minister, I think a rollback of this provision would be pretty much the only one thing that they would ask. Of course, the list is much longer, but one wish, that would be the wish.
Right. See, we're going to end this live broadcast with one last question. This one might put you in a tight spot, Kalpesh. If you were the finance minister of the country, right, what 3 things would you change in the current budget?
Glad that I'm not, but left to me, I think it's time for a strategic reset. It's time that India reacts to what's happening around it. I think in one swoop we should bring down corporate tax rates. We should abolish MAT because it's a law which has outlived its utility, and we should abolish DDT. With these 3 things, I think then you're setting the path for growth of corporates and hopefully restarting the private investment side.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Kalpesh. It was really a pleasure having you on the show. Hello and welcome to this special pre-budget broadcast of International Business Times in partnership with Deloitte. Today we're going to talk about direct tax and transfer pricing, and for this I have with me a special guest on the show. I have Cishweshwar Mudigonda, the partner of Deloitte India, especially for direct tax and transfer pricing with me. Welcome to the show, Cishweshwar. Talking about the expectations of the industry and what the finance minister could roll out in his this budget, which essentially will also be the present government's last budget that they present. Many are calling it the Great Indian Budget like us. Some are calling it it's going to be a populist budget. What it's going to be remains to be seen. But now, what should the finance minister do, if I ask you in terms of to make the tax environment more investor friendly?
In my view, I think what he should do is simplification of the law and implementation.
Right.
I think both at the policy level and execution level has to simplify.
Right. So now talking about do you think there will be an effort to address the issues of transfer pricing and dispute resolution regarding that?
Yeah, I think if you look at the multinational community, the biggest challenge for them is litigation. And in India, tax litigation can go all the way up to Supreme Court, and which may take about 10 to 15 years. So one of the things to my mind, the finance minister should focus on is to reduce the litigation and take measures in this budget towards that, which has been the ask not just from transfer pricing front but also from other taxation laws, whether it is direct or indirect. I think one of the things that should be done is to use the existing machinery in the form of dispute resolution panel. In fact, I remember the law minister talking about pre-litigation mediation. I think that is very much essential in the area of transfer pricing. The DRP, that is the dispute resolution panels, should be used adequately to mediate before, or rather mediate, before the litigation.
Right. Now, you've been in the industry for quite some time now. What do you think are the major issues where the finance ministry should take cognizance in, and they should really think about that and addressing, given the current budget which is coming up?
I think when you look at from a taxation perspective, if I cover that in the first part, the US has already talking about the reforms and what will happen to a lot of companies which are investing outside US and investing into US. I think taking cognizance of that, the finance minister should make sure that India attracts enough investments to invest either in infrastructure or in education sector. I think that is one which he has to focus on. And that can be achieved by and large by increasing the ease of doing business, which has been the focus and mantra for quite some time. But I think we need to see the change at the implementation level, at the officer who's going to implement the policy. I think that should be the focus.
You mentioned about the reforms in the US. Do you think that should be the benchmark for a country like India, wherein the industry overall in India is also growing with the time?
I don't think that is the benchmark. In my view, you have to set your own benchmarks based on your economy and what is the need of the hour. So if we look at, I think our infrastructure industry requires a significant investment. So taking that into account, while you can take a clue from what US has done, but we need to have our own policies to address some of the key challenges that we are facing today.
Right. A while ago we were discussing about the charges which are expected in the days to come, which have already been done and expected as well. What's your thought on that?
I think if you just look at the area of transfer pricing, a lot of changes have happened in the last 10-15 years.
Right.
There's not much to be done other than bringing down the litigation. And also, it's not in the budget, but if you look at outside the budget, APA has been one of the greatest success stories of Indian transfer pricing authorities. So the learnings from the APA authority should be trickled down to ensure that the taxpayers are not put through unnecessary hurdles in the course of audits.
Right. We are currently in a live broadcast of pre-budget, known as the Great Indian Budget, from International Business Times, and I have with me Mr. Cishweshwar Mudigonda, the partner of Deloitte India over here. A while ago, we were also discussing about how the Indian government wants to know when an international company comes in and they pay taxes. So there are some issues over there. How do you elaborate on that?
I think there are multiple issues when you look at a multinational coming into India and operating in India, which form it is coming, whether you talk about a permanent establishment or an Indian company which is having a business outside India, there is a foreign tax credit. So how do you claim the foreign tax credit? There have to be rules easing around that. And of course, we talked about transfer pricing, another area which, if you look at every multinational in India, which is operating in India today, has transfer pricing as it's one of the biggest agenda items in its board meetings. So I think some of these areas are what the finance minister should focus at.
Right. Now, towards the end of this particular interaction with you, there's one thing which we ask every guest on this particular show, on the pre-budget discussions. If you were the finance minister of the country at this point of time, having been in the industry and dealing with direct tax and transfer pricing, what would you change, and what would your focus be per se?
Well, first of all, I don't want to be in their shoes. I know it's really a challenging task, but if I have to answer your question, I think there are 2 or 3 priorities I would really look at. First and foremost is education, the skills development. This where I think we need to ensure, though we talk about demographic dividend, but then to really reap that dividend, we have to invest a lot and focus a lot on skills. The second one I would talk about, or I would really look at, is infrastructure. Be it industry or be it agriculture, I think infrastructure will make a significant difference on economy and the growth that we are looking at, and everyone knows the challenges around the infrastructure. The third one I would really look at is while policy level enough noise is being made, but I think we should look at the grassroots level as to how the implementation of those policies is being made. I think these would be my top 3 items.
Right. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having
Thank
you
you.
on the show. And thanks to you for joining us today for this live broadcast. In case you have any question regarding transfer pricing and direct tax, you can always comment below. We'll try and have some answers for you regarding these particular questions. Thank you very much for joining us. Hello and welcome to this yet another one more special live broadcast. We are talking about the pre-budget expectations, and now we're going to talk about personal tax, what the salary class is expecting, and everyone is looking for some relief from the upcoming budget. Many are calling it the populist budget and many are calling it the Great Indian Budget, in the last budget of the current government. Now, to discuss the personal tax further, I have with me on this show right now Ms. Saraswathi Kasturirangan, the partner at Deloitte India. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
And thank you very much. Now, a lot of people have been talking about personal tax, and this is like by and large the focus sector for most of the people, especially the salaried class as well. A recent statement by the Finance Minister Jaitley about income tax and broadening, since the base has become broader, and how things are going to be changing in the, possibly changing in the next budget. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, there have been a lot of claims from the ministry saying that post demonetization, the budget base has, the return filing base has really increased. So there is a lot of positive hope from the salaried class. Notwithstanding the fact that during all the budgets in the past, he's really made a statement saying that I don't want to erode the existing taxpayer base. But nevertheless, the expectation from the salaried class especially is definitely that they would get some kind of reliefs.
Yeah.
And it makes sense as well, because the government is really looking forward to a significant growth, economic growth, and to boost that, you really need an increase in consumption and demand from people like you and me, the salaried class, and therefore there is a lot of sense in to put some kind of a relief on their plates as well.
Right.
Now, so just looking at what kind of reliefs could be and all that, I think there is a lot of balancing to be done there. If we look at the existing base, India only has around 2.4% of the total population filing returns. And out of that, if we look at people with income over 5 lakhs, there are around 76 lakh people, out of which again 56 lakh are the salaried class. So naturally this is a very key population for the tax return filing and really needs to be looked at closely.
So what direction do you think the Finance Minister should take in the days to come?
So definitely a lot of balancing, of course, and I think that would be the prime focus, and whatever benefits are to be given away will definitely be in a manner that does not erode the base, because the base is very small. Does not make sense eroding it in any case. Plus, of course, the salaried class is always an injured class. They always feel that they are being taxed on a gross basis, whereas the others are being taxed on a net basis. Say, for instance, if I have a house property income, there is a deduction. For a business income, there is a deduction, but not so for the salaried class. So I think one thing they would definitely be looking at, and hopefully we would see that in the budget in a couple of days, would be the reintroduction of standard deduction.
Right. Now, we have a question over here that how do the experts interpret the statement of the Finance Minister in the days to come, and also the fact that how about the radical thought of income tax abolition? something that various experts have noted. And will it reduce the evasion and increase tax base? And what are the detriments of this model? What do you think?
So I firmly believe death and taxes are here to stay.
Right.
More so income tax.
Right.
Not only from a professional standpoint,
Right.
but from a practical standpoint, even from our cultural days, we've heard from Chanakya's time, you should collect taxes, but in a way it doesn't hurt people.
Right.
Like the bee takes away the honey from the flowers.
Right.
So I think it's going to stay. It does not really make sense to make such a drastic change, and I'm sure nothing dramatic as this is going to happen in the budget 2 days from now. But yes, reliefs are something which will definitely
People will be
need to
looking
make-
at
Absolutely.
definitely.
Absolutely.
Right, now we have one more question over here. The government is motivating people to save more money in financial instruments and avoid locking up of surplus funds in physical assets like gold. Whether the ministry will agree to change tax deduction limit under ATC investments.
So ATC traditionally has been one of the sections in the Income Tax Act which sort of tried to give people some kind of a direction in investing by giving tax reliefs. And somehow it has seemed to work in the Indian mindset where, say for instance, an insurance. Many people take an insurance not because they want a life cover, but because they get a tax relief. So I think given that, yes, ATC could be one of the means where this could be, it could be a section which sort of the government should look at to widen the investments to be made by salaried class.
What about revisiting the overcrowded section ATC?
I think the ATC itself needs a total revamp. As you rightly used the word, overcrowded is an ideal word. And what really is happening there is, it is a section which provides not only reliefs for investments, but also for certain expenses, tuition fee, housing loan repayment. So I think clearly there has to be a clear-cut demarcation or a widening of the ATC to see, to put in, to allow multiple things in a more clear and directional manner.
Would you expect any revision in the tax slabs in the days to come?
I would say the entry slab would definitely be maintained given the base erosion mantra, no base erosion mantra. But there is a lot of hope and space for realigning the tax slabs.
Right.
So for instance, does the 20% really have to kick in at 5 lakhs is something which is debatable. It can possibly go up. Does the 30% have to kick in at 10 lakhs is again something which we can debate about, though we'll have to see how the government would take it, give their pressures on revenue collection as well.
Right. We spoke about ATC and 80 days right next to it. So what about that? Do you think that any expansion would really help?
It should. See, we are a country where the insurance, the medical insurance is not something which is driven by the government. Social security measures have a long way to go. So the individual insurance is something which definitely should be given an impetus. And we are seeing rising medical cost. We are seeing increase insurance cover cost itself where pre-existing diseases are there and so on. So definitely there is a case to enhance that. And we recently did a survey and the number that came out was 50,000 as against the current 25,000 that was
Right.
there.
Now talking about the balancing the expectations of the salaried class, how do you think the government would be able to do that?
So I think the government should sort of look at it in a two-pronged way. One is look at it from an individual expectation perspective in terms of giving reliefs, in terms of standard deduction, maybe whitening ATC and all that. What I also think as a long-term thing is that they should possibly look at where the employee benefits are going from a corporate perspective. So a lot of companies are focusing on, say, reskilling their employees, making sure that they have wellness benefits. Gender diversity is another area they are focusing on. So for each of these, it is important for the government to recognize that these are the areas where the employees are going to get benefits, and then put in tax laws which are aligned to the direction the industry is taking, rather than be reactive about all of this.
Right. Now about the expanding the market link saving limit, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that's something again that would get under ATC.
Right.
Yes, we've had schemes such as the Rajiv Gandhi equity linked savings scheme and all that in the past, which were highly restrictive. There was too many conditions. First time investors, the quantum of investment should be below a certain limit and all that. So for market linked investment scheme is something which certainly the government should drive, and that is something which should definitely ensure that there is more investment brought in. But the only takeaway that I would have possibly is that it should never be restricted.
Right. We were talking about housing for all a while ago, and we spoke about the self-occupied properties. And what do you think can be done over there?
Oh, I think that was a difficult decision that the government put in during the last budget, where benefit for self-occupied property was sort of limited, not only limited to 2 lakhs, but it was not allowed to be set off against that. It has to be carried forward. I just can't imagine why a first-time investor in a house property would need to take the brunt of that. I think that is definitely something that is not aligned to the housing for all team and really needs a revisiting there.
Right. If you were the finance minister of the country and personal tax being your domain, what fixes would you make and how?
So maybe I would like to take a gamble of trying to give reliefs and then rope in more people, rather than be conservative in trying and protecting the base to too much of an extent. So maybe the 30% slab rate which kicks in at 10 lakhs, I feel that's very low. Maybe that can be pushed up a little. In a way, it will not erode the base, but it will really give relief to the employees and to the general individuals as well, and it will ensure that there is more investment and saving in the economy. And I think that is the way of pushing a positive cycle on rather than playing a defensive game.
Right, that's the only thing you would change. Right, thank you very much for joining us on this show. It was a pleasure having you over here.
Danish.
Yes.
My pleasure as well.
And what happens in the budget remains to be seen. 1st of February will be the D-Day, and we'll all see all these expectations, speculation, they'll all come to an end, and we'll finally have the Great Indian Budget, as we are calling it. Now, how good will it be for the people? Will it be a populist budget or not? That remains to be seen on February 1st. Until then, thank you very much for tuning in. We'll come back to you with a special live broadcast that day as well with some of the industry experts, and we will try to decipher the budget 2018. Till then, do take good care of yourselves.